All right, we're recording. It is the C4 I-205 Tolling Diversion Subcommittee, longest title of any subcommittee that exists, I think. And we are recording, and the meeting is yours.
Hello, everyone. Trent, just real quickly, who do we know of that is not going to be here today?
Nobody has notified me that they are not here or not going to be here. So no one has notified me.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone, for being here today. And I guess we have a, pardon me 1 second here. Machine's still loading here slightly.
Well, happy to help with what's on the agenda.
Go ahead, Trent. Yep.
There's a broader housekeeping item on the agenda, followed by some follow-up questions that ODOT and WSP are wanting to engage with y'all on. Those are follow-up questions from your September meeting. They're in the packet that we provided online, as well as a quick update or just updates on the status of the draft environmental analysis that we've been waiting for, expecting, has been advertised for a while. So that's the big piece of it. And I'm part of the housekeeping note and happy to get started if that's your preference, Commissioner. Okay, great.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm almost there, but just go ahead.
All right. So a lot of this is sort of a tag team with ODOT on what some of the housekeeping items are, but really this is an opportunity for you, the Diversion Subcommittee, to look ahead at the next several months and what you have in line for work. And you'll see that on page 2 of your packet, where I wonder if it makes sense to share the screen in the meantime. Let me do that.
Trent, sorry to interrupt, but we also have those items included in the PowerPoint that Adela could share as well, those goals and work plan items, if you'd like.
That would start the PowerPoint. That's a pretty good idea. Let me make that available to y'all. Adela, if you want to get to that page, that would be helpful. So what I'll say, just maybe as a preamble to the group in terms of administrative needs, how I can help you, this committee, move forward is that we know ODOT has a target for April, March of getting some policy set in place or policy recommendations in place for monitoring and mitigation programs. And so you're going to see on some of the upcoming, that's the second bullet there, some of the upcoming dates and opportunities for meetings to cover a lot of that work. In addition, more opportunities to discuss the environmental analysis, especially once it's published for review and has an open comment period. My questions for you, the Diversion Subcommittee, is as you think about this and as you think about what you need to be successful, it's a lot of information to take on in the next 6 months. And I think we can all appreciate that it's been challenging to get a lot of information in a 1-hour time window once a month, and B, to respond to it. So one thing that we've talked about amongst the team is whether it would be fruitful to have a longer meeting in one of the upcoming meetings, or sort of set aside a more specific meeting for a couple of things, either for the environmental analysis walkthrough at the appropriate time, maybe a longer meeting to talk more about some of the proposed mitigation projects that came out of those workshops a month ago. That's something that Commissioner Marl had talked about at our last meeting. You know, what specifically is proposed for the Arch Bridge, for example, one of those flagship projects. And would it take more time than what we have in this hour to get into the weeds about that? So sort of as your facilitator, I'm hoping y'all can maybe give me some guidance on how to help you with that if you want more time in that sort of conversation. If you want a bigger review of the EA when the time is right. And oh, by the way, December, your meeting is like 2 days before the big December holidays. And my guess is that many of you are going to be in transit to family and other things, or it's just a complicated month in general. So is that really even a feasible meeting time for this group? And as you're looking at this work plan and thinking about that stuff, please think about those several things, and if we can either talk about it now or revisit the feasibility of those calendar items moving forward at the end of the meeting. Up to you.
Okay. Well, thanks for that opening, Trent. Appreciate that. And I'm going to just take a liberty here and share some concerns I have. And if you all agree, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. And first of all, I want to be very careful what I'm saying. So I know that ODOT, I'm not not picking on you or anything. I'm not being critical when I say this. So I know you have a large amount of tasks. You're in a world that you haven't been in before, and so forth. And there's, I know we have a lot of challenges with, labor and hiring people and getting stuff done. But I thought that we would be farther along at this point when it comes to getting some of the information requests and some of the progress we thought we'd be by now. And they just hasn't really come to fruition yet. And yet the timelines are still there. I don't say they're really deadlines, but I see them as timelines. And so I think the idea maybe of us, the members, specifically the members of the C4 Diversion Committee here, the elected leaders and the city staff and all those county staff, all of us maybe sit down and go through all the things that we think we all need. Trent, you mentioned Commissioner Marl's questions about the Arch Bridge and so on and so forth. So things like that. I think it's maybe that if we can gather up all of that and say, here's what we need, here's some unanswered questions, and here's our concerns, I think we would be better equipped. These meetings are short, they are during lunchtime. However, the other complicating factor is that we do not have often full attendance here. So we're all getting like bites of it. I know I missed a meeting, for example. So, I did go back and watch and listen, so I know I can get up to date, but we're still getting it in just these little bites. So I think having some kind of a whether it's a informal meeting, online or offline or in person or however, just to discuss what we think we need on this, out of this effort, and so we can make our contribution and make our recommendations as the timeline grows closer and closer. I said a lot, so any thoughts on that, folks? Susie.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, I completely agree. And I have missed several meetings, but I have had the benefit of going back and watching what happened in the meetings. But I do feel like I'm still, I don't really feel like we're going to be able to get what we need unless we sit down and identify it in detail. And it's just hard to do it in this short time frame. So I completely support your idea of whether it's an informal, it's an in-person meeting or it's some other Zoom venue.
Great. Councilor Sherman, I'm going to call on you because I know you and I had some shared interest in getting some more detail, and not all of us are, well, you and I are, I think we're kind of like numbers guys. And I think there's some other folks that expressed interest in getting some of the more details, like the weeds stuff. I'm not sure that's going to be the appetite of all of us, but I know that you and I never got a lot of what we asked for. We got some of it. So I don't want, again, I'm going to be courteous and respectful of everyone here, but do you share any ideas on this topic as far as having an informal or an in-person meeting or whatnot?
Yeah, no, I would agree that, I think just the fact that these are relatively short meetings and, we are not really able to dive too deep into the weeds when we meet. Given the number of meetings we attend, I'm the last one to say I want longer meetings, but, we definitely could use more information in this circumstance. And I guess that would be really, from the committee's perspective, whether you would want as a committee to expand a meeting periodically to be longer for specific topics that we would align in advance, where we would say, okay, let's talk about the specific projects that are on the list so far. And we're going to allow 2 hours or 3 hours to kind of go through those, at a single sitting. Or whether it's an opportunity where a subset of this group is able to meet in person with some of the key people. We've had some offers to sit down and kind of go through some of the analytics and some of the detail where, for the broad group, it might not be very helpful to kind of sit there and pick apart like, oh, why do you have this factor rated at this level? And then it would be our responsibility as a subset to kind of come back and report back to that. And I'm not sure I don't know what serves our group the best, nor do I know from, a ODOT's perspective, or or the toll team's perspective, what is a most efficient way for them to bring the information to us as well, because the last thing I want to do is create a situation where it's just us sitting in a room for hours and hours just picking things back and forth. I want to have a productive time as well. So it's kind of the thoughts I have so far. Thank you. Thanks, Commissioner.
Great. Anyone else? Councillor Baumgartner.
Thank you. I would agree with what's been said so far.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Morrow.
I guess I would say that I'm pretty indifferent to this. We've attended these meetings for a while now, and it feels like a lot of the information we get is the same, and that we are asking a lot of the same questions with similar responses. I'm thinking of all the times I've heard from fellow members of this committee who have said, I've tried to ask this, and then I've tried to email and I haven't gotten answers. So quite frankly, I don't really care. And I'd be happy to do it either way. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Lewis, thoughts?
Lots of thoughts. Honestly, I think we should prepare something a little bit more like a workshop, and it's probably, in my mind, something that we rely on our jurisdictional staff and actually don't rely on ODOT staff, and would come up with just, here's the outline of the gaps of information that's been publicly shared, either with any of us directly, with this committee, or with reports that are accessible. And if we all can agree to it, kind of make that our published set of findings. If we had all of this information, we would see that our questions are answered. Lacking this information, we don't have the tools that we need to know the impacts on our communities. And then we can actually all be working off the same document. And then hopefully we'll be able to get our answers. And if there are things that are just not doable, we'll get that in writing. But I don't know if, expanding this meeting to 2 hours in the format that we have is going to get us anything different than 1 hour does. I don't think it's a lack of running the meetings efficiently. I think it's that we're all thinking through kind of different scenarios. And if we were working off of one playbook, we'd be more efficient.
Yeah. Thank you. I agree with that. Rory, Councillor Rory B.
Hey, everybody. Sorry, I was just listening with my camera off there for a minute. I kind of agree with Adam, I guess, in that I'm kind of indifferent. I do think that it'd be a benefit to have the opportunity to have a meeting in the future to discuss what we need and what our specific questions and asks are. I know if we were to set a date for that, I could connect with, and Councilor Baumgart and I could connect with our staff, Lance Calvert, who's been doing a lot of the transportation work, and then we could come with specific requests. But at the same time, I guess I'm kind of cynical about the whole process at this point. So I don't know what would come from it, but I think pushing is important on the topic of diversion. So those are my thoughts.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. I think as far as information requests, there might be some that maybe we haven't been clear enough on to ODOT. Maybe there's some they think they may have answered. So in their defense, I probably think it might be a good idea to at least summarize, and have a list of all those things we're still expecting and whatever kind of detail around there. Also, again, going back to Councillor Lewis, I think framing up, make sure that the conversation's framed up or the meeting's framed up in a way that we end up with an output at the end would be beneficial. We have a path towards, whatever topics we're going to cover and how they're covered, so that our time is well spent. I don't think any of us really want to sit in a meeting and get nothing accomplished. We've all experienced that before. So Trent, I think you hear an agreement to something, so maybe we can do a doodle poll for some time in the future and find out what time works. If this time is not the best time, but I'd like to get as many of us, some of our folks are not here today, get as many of us around the table for this discussion, and perhaps even have it framed up. Maybe our staff can help us put together something that can make that as productive as possible.
Thank you for that. I do. Yeah, hearing your comments, and we're recording it so I can go listen to them again, just to verify what I'm hearing. But I just want to make sure that I'm targeting this effort in the way that you want it to be targeted. Remember that there are kind of three things on the table for your consideration. There is a deeper dive into those flagship projects and the mitigation proposals on those projects. Is that something that you want more of a workshop on to get those details and questions on? The other thing is when the EA publishes, or the draft EA publishes, do you want a bigger workshop with ODOT and WSP to walk through what that EA is spelling out early on in its release date, so that you have more time to like think about how either this group or your jurisdiction in general will respond to those pieces? And then the third thing, which I think can probably still live in these regular meetings, is the mitigation and monitoring, the monitoring proposals for mitigation, and what that monitoring policy looks like and how it's baked into the toll program moving forward. And that's something that I think can be worked out over multiple months. I know that that's what I've heard ODOT and WSP say will be baked into the regional toll committee. I'm sorry if I said the acronym wrong, advisory committee. So that's something that's going to come out of this group into the regional toll advisory committee. I think that can all live within these like little 1 hour meetings. That's something that can be built upon. But those other two things, the flagship project mitigation proposals and what those mean and the questions that y'all have about those, et cetera. And then, you know, more broadly, like, do you want that environmental analysis deep dive when that comes available? So is that where you want those two workshops, or one of those workshops? Which one would be in person? Help me help you.
Anyone want to jump in?
Two workshops. I see Councilor Sherman. Two workshops. Going for three workshops. I'm sorry. Texas cattle call.
Keep going. I think two workshops specifically on those topics where we can really kind of dive into them would be very helpful. And I would be supportive of that. Thank you.
Okay.
May I recommend
Is your hand still up, Susie? Okay.
May I recommend that if we do two workshops, that's fine. I can doodle poll for those. I'm guessing here, the environmental analysis one, that's going to be information that's presented really quick and with its own little response window. I would really like that one to be, I think, recorded, and it would be, I think, for the benefit of all of your jurisdictions, for your colleagues to pass around. I would maybe think that, as hard as it would be to sit through a longer meeting, would be a good one to have on like a Zoom recording. But for that one about the projects and the flagship, you know, those types of things, I could see that being a good in-person meeting for y'all, and we could figure out the when and where of that. Does that sound agreeable? Okay. And then timing wise, would y'all, my understanding is that the EA is supposed to drop sometime maybe in December is the last date that I heard. So we could aim for maybe having this sort of in-person huddle on those proposed mitigation projects, maybe in November sometime, maybe late November, early December. And then maybe the workshop on the EA aiming towards like early to mid-December, just kind of the draft timeline that they have for that. Does that make sense to everybody? Seeing thumbs. Okay, great. I'll get some doodle polls in that direction. Thanks for this housekeeping 21 minutes. I really appreciate it. ODOT and WSP, that's what I needed.
Okay. So I'm looking at the agenda. So is there a presentation from ODOT today, I gather?
We do have a few slides focused on responses to questions that were received previously. And Trent, as you move forward, working with a variety of staff, let us know how we can be helpful. Your staffs all have the data that we've been relying on so far. So there will be very well informed in terms of, I think, trying to help you figure out the workshop that best will suit your needs. And we're happy to help in any way needed. Nice to see everybody today. I missed the last meeting also because I was at a conference. I am here today, and Nicole McDermott, who is leading our environmental analysis process, is going to do the bulk of the presentation today. We want to provide answers to the questions that were recorded from the last meeting, focused on methodology and diversion. provide some updates and next steps specific to safety analysis, and hopefully have time for a little bit of Q&A. So the first few slides that Adela will skip here are really what Trent just went over in terms of proposed work plan and goals. So I'll hand it to you now, Nicole.
All right, thanks, Mandy. Hi, everybody. Thanks again for having us here. Happy to be here to hopefully answer some of the questions that were asked in September. So we want to go through those. We also want to provide a brief overview of our safety analysis and next steps. Before I get into these questions and responses, I did want to also provide one update on the mitigation memo that was part of your packet from the September meeting. So we've had one update on an intersection and a mitigation that I just want to touch on here since it was part of your prior packet. So one intersection, Stafford Road and Mountain Road, was previously identified as just being impacted by the build alternative, but we received some information from the county about the mobility standard for that intersection. And so we updated the analysis, and that intersection is now showing that it's impacted under the no build and the build. So we can of course dive into the details of that and what that means from a mitigation standpoint as we get into that workshop that we were just discussing. So, but did want to provide that update. You can go and go to the next slide, Adela. So there was a question about methodology and how we identified the 50 intersections. So the intersections are located within our area of potential impact, or API. So the API was identified based on traffic modeling and input from partner agencies. So the team used the regional travel demand model to identify roadways that under the build alternative would meet the 3 criteria that you see in that funnel diagram on the screen. So as a reminder, just the build alternative includes the 2 toll points, as well as all phases of the I-205 improvements project, including the 3rd lane and the seismic upgrades to the bridges along I-205. And then the no build includes no tolling and only phase 1A of the improvements project, which is the Abernathy Bridge reconstruction currently underway. So again, these 3 criteria that were used to set the API were roadways that were projected to have an increase in peak hour volume of more than 10%, roadways that were projected to have a greater than 0.07 or 0.7, excuse me, volume to capacity ratio. So that's when you're approaching a volume to capacity ratio of 1 is where you start to see congestion. So setting that lower catches those roadways as they start to see some congestion. And then 3rd, roadways that were projected to have an increase of more than 100 vehicles in the peak hour. So using all 3 of those criteria, if a area met all 3 of those, then it was included in the API. So based on this criteria, we drew an initial API and selected 34 intersections for study. We then sent that out to partner agencies for review, and based on the input we received, we added an additional 16 intersections, and then that extended the API further to the south to include the Canby and Aurora area. So next slide. So the second part of the question related to the selection of the 50 intersections was about why 27 intersections were not identified for mitigation. So last time at the last meeting, when we talked about all the intersections that were identified for mitigation, there were 27 that we did not discuss. So those 27 intersections were not discussed, but they were analyzed, and they determined that they were not impacted. And so because they were not impacted by the project, and that was shown through the analysis, they do not require mitigation. So that's why they were not further discussed in that September meeting. So a question was also asked about the cascading effects resulting from diversion and how that's captured in the analysis. So this is captured through the modeling. So the model anticipates how cars kind of move throughout the system, and as one place becomes congested, perhaps from diversion, those cars, move in the model and go to another area. So this sort of cascading effects is captured in that modeling and reflected in our transportation analysis. So as the analysis that's been presented, that has captured those kind of cascading effects. And the results of that modeling included those intersections we discussed last time as well. And that information will also be included in the draft EA. So you'll see more details of that in the draft EA. Next slide. So a question was asked about analysis around the Arch Bridge, and the intersections at both ends of the Arch Bridge were included in our analysis. So for the Main Street and 7th Street intersection, we are seeing an interim impact. This is an impact in 2027, but not in 2045. And so we are proposing mitigation for that intersection that would improve overall kind of mobility in the area. I'm right now looking at pedestrian improvements and potentially some funding for commute trip reduction programs. And then the Willamette Falls Drive in Oregon 43, it does not meet the standards in the no build, but the project does not make that intersection worse. So it's not identified as a project impact, and therefore it was not identified for mitigation. Next slide. And then looking at Borland and 65th, the analysis indicates that this intersection may be impacted in 2045. So it will be, it's one of those that will be monitored for long-term mitigation, and that long-term mitigation could include restriping, adding a turn lane, or and/or transit signal priority along Borland. So the project team's also looking at whether or not safety mitigations may be needed along Borland and considering some improved pedestrian crossings there. Next slide. So there were also a few questions related to the monitoring plan, which, you know, Trent mentioned earlier, and as we were discussing the work plan, more details will we will discuss more details about this with this group in the future. So ODOT really wants to work with the diversion subcommittee to identifying what that monitoring plan looks like. So we'll include a framework for when and how investments are made and how to address impacts as they occur. We expect those items to be included in that monitoring plan. We also expect the monitoring plan would address things like the tools that would be used for data collection, the metrics that would be monitored, travel time, volumes, and then also geographic locations for where that data collection would occur, and the frequency of the monitoring and reporting. So those were all the responses to those prior questions. I can pause here for a minute for follow-up, and then I have a few brief slides on the safety analysis too. So I'm happy to just go straight into those, and we could save questions for the end or pause for a minute here.
Well, thank you, Nicole. I do have one thing, and maybe I didn't frame it as a question each time I brought this up, but I have pointed out my concern about the base year being 2015, right? And if some of those intersections failed prior to 2015 as a result of current diversion, is it really is it fair if there were impacts, and if we're basing off the 2015 year, that alters your results, does it not? Or could?
Yeah, I mean, I might need Mandy, did you want to jump in there? Sorry, you came off mute. But...
Go ahead. Oh, you started.
Well, I was going to say I might need Chris to jump in kind of on the technical nature of that, but I think using a different base year would change the analysis. But Chris, do you want to speak to kind of why 2015 was selected as the base year?
Sure. Yeah, 2015 was selected as a base year primarily because we're using the regional model as the basis for all this analysis. And that is the most current baseline model that Metro has. They typically update it every 5 years or so, but it didn't happen in 2020 due to COVID. So But nonetheless, the model we calibrate the model to the conditions that were occurring at that time. So we calibrated that base year model to 2015 conditions. And then we, based on land use projections and whatever changes in the network are occurring, we update that model to 2027 conditions and then 2045 conditions. So I don't think our results would be different if we had a 2018, 2020 baseline model, because we would still update to our horizon years that we're analyzing. So if it were a 2020 model, then we'd still update it to 2027 and 2045. Those updates would be smaller increments because it wouldn't be from 2015. Anyway,
I'll just say, in addition to that, what we want to do through the NEPA analysis is to understand if the project is going to make future conditions better or worse. And so we understand that there's diversion now and that it's problematic. What we're trying to do is, again, that comparison, which is not the intent of the project was not to remove all diversion from the region, but it was to look at how to improve 205 while adding congestion pricing, and then to evaluate the associated broader benefits and impacts in addition to 205. And so that's the analysis that we've been working to present to you all and to the public, and will be detailed out more in the EA. So it does look at existing conditions, and then it builds off that in terms of projected conditions.
Yeah, and I just want to respond a little bit to Chris and just try to make my point a little bit more vivid. So in 2010 and prior, before I was on the commission, and I had my business alive, I had a vendor and a customer that was on Willamette Falls Drive, still there today. They're still in business there today. And I can tell you from experience, because I went there almost every couple of weeks, at least 2-3 times a month. I, personally know how much traffic there was on Willamette Falls Drives in 2010 and before. And as I became commissioner, and slowly, again, visit that area, I just watched that traffic flow and diversion increase and increase and increase to the point to where it is today. 2015, it was pretty well in the thick of it. So my point again is there are traffic counts that ODOT has on record of what the traffic is going down the interstates, right? And the time of day and all of that. And so there's obviously data and evidence today that can demonstrate that the traffic increased a certain amount, but where it's relevant today may not have been the intention, but where it's relevant today, if we're saying like an intersection of Stafford and Mountain Road is failing today, so therefore won't be mitigated. Well, if you're using 2015 as the baseline, maybe if you use 2010 as the baseline, it would be mitigated. We're talking real dollars here. It would seem that if there's mitigation and funding for that, that a lot of projects might just really be not funded or qualify.
Right. I mean, when we do, the whole region does project planning kind of with the regional transportation model, and that's the backbone of our work. And we're relying on Metro to do that modeling. And so we're using the data that's available and the best practices that transportation modeling does for NEPA projects. So I hear your suggestion and comment of doing it differently, and it's not the approach that the modeling experts that we work with throughout the region have determined we should do for this project.
Yeah, but I won't belabor it any longer than to say that maybe if they understood our concerns, maybe they would take a second look at it or reconsider, but I won't belabor it. Councilor Sherman.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick clarifying questions, just so I kind of fully understand the answers. So Nicole, you had mentioned that the diversion analysis does include the cascading effects from like one area to another. That's still within the analysis zone, right? It's not outside of that area, or is the cascading effects from a broader perspective assessed as well? So I think Mayor Walters, back when she asked that question, was kind of like, are we, if it's backing up in multiple locations, are we able to kind of gauge where that actually goes to? Does that make sense?
Yeah, Chris, go ahead. I think that
Sure.
that does make sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's exactly how the API was set, by looking at the volume changes in the system. And those include any cascading volume changes as well as more direct ones. So that's how the whole API was developed in the first place, to try to encompass all of that. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, so it is analyzing in a much broader regional perspective. Okay, good. And then the other question I had, just on that kind of initial triggering to be included as part of the kind of the 50. I think that the numbers were it was a 10% increase in volume and at least 100 vehicles. So does that then just kind of translate back to an intersection has to have at least 1,000 vehicles moving through on an hourly basis? Is my math in the ballpark there to hit both those numbers? If you have a 10% increase and that increase had to be at least 100 vehicles, you would say it's at least 1,000 vehicles moving through an intersection on an hourly basis. And
Those were actually used on roadway segments, not just
Gotcha. So I guess really my question, this is just more because I'm a neophyte at this. Is that a lot of vehicles? Is that, is that a reasonable number to say, or how do we get to that number where we say, okay, that's a reasonable number to assess? Lower than that, it's just not a major, thoroughfare. And, so I don't know, is that a reasonable question to ask?
Yeah, no, I think so. And you're right. The roadways that were identified were more of the major roadways, but that kind of set the whole outer limits of the API. Then everything inside it was included. So
Okay.
so smaller roads, because some roads aren't even in the regional model. It can only go so far as
Sure.
road else.
Yeah. I'm not, it's not my point isn't like, hey, if the artery is messed up, all the capillaries are going to be messed up too. I mean, yeah, that's a possibility. So, but it just in your modeling, that was kind of that was a good number that gave us a good feel for, here are the major arterials that are being impacted by this.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and being able to set those 3 criteria, it accounts for, different scales of intersections as well. And, is it an intersection that maybe has more volume, but it's an intersection that could handle that more volume? So that's why it's the VC ratio, as well as the increase in cars, as well as the percentage increase in volume over the intersection. So using all 3 of them kind of accounts for the different operations of a specific intersection as well.
Yeah, no, my question is just more as a layperson trying to determine, okay, well, if we set it at 2,000 cars versus 1,000, did we eliminate a whole bunch of possibilities that we probably should have looked at? And it sounds like what you're saying is that's a reasonable number as a kind of a cut point. So,
yeah.
All right. Thanks for
Councilor Sherman. I'll say, we started the process with methodology conversations and looked to regional modeling experts. So it wasn't just, the toll team or Metro, but we did ask for input from a variety of different jurisdictions before we even started the analysis, and ask those very same questions of like, is this reasonable? Is this the best approach? And so there was agreement before we move forward that this approach was reasonable, did make sense.
Great.
And I did just want to clarify, it's 100 vehicles, not 1,000. So in the peak hour.
An increase of 100.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. All right, thank you.
John?
Yes, okay, I'm going to piggyback on Commissioner Savas. He's correct, but he was always correct. But on this thing here is 205, when Congressperson Hooley demanded that the third lane be kept in on I-205 between Stafford and I-5, that is when the problems began. And so when you go, well, we're going to go from 2015, you totally missed that it really began when those lanes became permanent back in the 2000s. And those are the numbers we have to use. And if you look at those numbers, the whole area of Stafford and West Lynn is a bottleneck because of the third lanes between I-205 and I-5. And then in addition to that, from talking to ODOT on this, there is nothing wrong from the what came from the legislature, that this tolling can be all the way out in North Portland for everybody coming in from Washington. And you'll make plenty of people happy in Oregon if you let them pay for it and forget doing the tolling here in Westland, Wilsonville, Oregon City, where we don't have alternative methods of transportation. The people that live in Washington, they're alternative, they can come and move and live in Oregon. Thank you.
Great. Next up is Councilor Baumgartner.
Thank you, Commissioner. I just wanted to ask what the predictability that you're using to predict this, these numbers of increases, and what is your confidence in that ability to predict people's behavior, basically? And also, what is your margin of error that you're using? How close are you getting to failure and not actually, and just kind of coming in under the radar on that?
Well, I would say, back to Mandy's earlier, point, this is based on, standard transportation analysis methodology, which we, also, worked with partners on what the appropriate methodology was for this project. And it's, based on the modeling, the regional modeling that exists in the Portland area, which, all transportation analysis in this area is based on that model. So I think we're confident in the, the results of that model, and that's how transportation analysis is done. You have to rely on a model to kind of predict into the future. I mean, as far as a specific margin of error, I don't have an answer to that. I don't know if Chris does, but we set a threshold for the mobility standard. So each intersection we're looking at has a different mobility standard set by the jurisdiction. And so that's the threshold that we're using to determine whether it's impacted or not. And, we're looking at that in 2027 and 2045 as those 2 years. And then there were some places that were right at that mobility standard, and they were included, after the mitigation workshops. We did pull those intersections in as being impacted because of they were right at that standard.
Thank you. So just to follow up then, was the failure predicted for the 3 lanes going down to 2 lanes that Mr. McCabe was just mentioning when that was implemented? Was what we're experiencing today foretold back then?
I'm not sure I understand that. What we're looking at in this analysis is a future condition that either includes the project in 2045 and 2027, which is the tolling and the 3 lanes, or does not include the project in 2027 and 2045, which would not include tolling and would not include. So those are the 2 things, what the comparison we're making is to a future build and a future no build. So I'm not sure.
Okay, sorry. So let me just rephrase that. I'm just wondering, because it wasn't that long ago, was the experience that we're having now, the diversion traffic impacts we're having now, predicted? Because the reason why I'm asking this question is because then I would have more confidence in this future project, because we're kind of basically having a repeat. And I want to know I just want to know if what's happening now was predicted.
I understand quite, Mandy. Yeah.
I can say that the 205 improvements project to add the 3rd lanes and widen the Abernathy Bridge, the Tualatin River bridges, has been planned for a number of years. And the whole reason for that project and the initiation of that project was the recognition that congestion was growing and would continue to grow on Interstate 205, that the narrowing down from 3 lanes to 2 lanes in the 7-mile area is the cause of a significant bottleneck, both in terms of congestion, mobility, and safety. And so, yes, I think that that has been well predicted and documented that congestion will continue to grow, both on I-5, and the spillover effects to the neighborhood would continue to worsen. And that's, I think, as Commissioner Savas and others have said, like that's playing out now in real time, and has continued to grow.
So after the 3-lane project occurred between I-5 and Stafford Road, how many years ago was that? And how many years have there been failed diversion problems in West Lynn?
I don't have the details of that project in front of me. Someone here perhaps might know the year off the top of their head. If not, we can look for that for you.
Just as a predictor of how long we'll possibly be experiencing failing and terrible impacts after the tolling gets implemented, I'm just wanting to make sure I know what to expect for the community. Thank you.
Well, again, I mean, we're looking at year 2045. So at this point, we're doing future forecasting and predictability. So we are looking significantly far into the future to look at what the benefits and impacts would be both on I-205 and the surrounding area.
So to that, just to add this conversation a little bit, just for understanding, if the I-5 Boone Bridge project was completed tomorrow, not going to be obviously, but if it was completed tomorrow, that would probably, and if the Rose Corridor was finished as well, and traffic flow on I-5 was improved, I would probably imagine there'd be a lot less diversion at rush hour, afternoon rush hour on Stafford Road and so forth, because people right now are saying, oh my God, I-5 is plugged up right now, Wilsonville Road. I'm going to pull off right now and just cut through, and I'll be on Stafford Road before too long, and then being dumped off of 205. And that is having a direct effect as well on 65th and all of that, and Portland Road, which leads to Willamette Falls Drive and so on. So in a way, I appreciate John's point that he raised, but it's not as simple as just one traffic problem or one backup gridlock, the gridlock of the system. So as we project this forward, are we going to be redoing this modeling again? Because your 2027, 2045 forecast is not assuming that those projects are built, or are they not?
That's a great question. And you're right, it's not simple. We do have really good regional planning here. And our 2045 data does assume that those projects are complete. They're currently in the regional transportation plan. So the 2027 data does not include the Rose Corridor project or the Boone Bridge project. The 2045 modeling does. And it includes all the other projects, the regional project scale projects that are included in those modeling years for the regional transportation plan.
Okay, thank you. Did you have more to present, Mandy?
There are a few more slides I think Nicole can go through relatively quickly if this is a pause, everyone's ready to pause for questions for just a minute.
I don't see any more hands up, so please proceed.
Okay. Yeah, Della, if you can just reshare. Great. Thank you. So on the safety analysis, so we just wanted to give a brief overview of safety analysis. Again, we're looking at existing conditions and future conditions in the safety analysis as well. So for that existing conditions, we were looking at existing crash data from 2015 to 2019. And again, I just want to be clear here, when we're looking at existing conditions, it's to note the point in time and to capture those existing conditions, but it's not what we're comparing the future scenario to. When what we're comparing to determine impacts, or comparing future conditions to future conditions. So future with the project and future without the project. So for that future conditions analysis, we calculate predictive crash frequencies. And so this is based on a methodology in the Highway Safety Manual. And that analysis does look at potential safety impacts on all modes, so cars, bikes, pedestrians. Next slide. So a few notes about what the just existing conditions analysis found. Most crashes in the API were injury or property damage only, not fatality crashes. The most common type of crash was due to the car failing to avoid the car head, kind of like a rear end collision or even a side collision. And then the crashes that involve pedestrians or bicycles do tend to be, greater in injury severity. And then there were two segments or two roadways that have included segments. So Oregon 99E and Willamette Falls Drive have segments that have a higher than average crash rate for roadways, similar roadways in the area. So again, that's just kind of an existing condition an analysis there. And then next slide. For what we're seeing in the future conditions analysis, crashes on 205 are expected to decrease by about 21%. The ramp crashes are expected to remain mostly the same. And then crashes on area roadways are similar under that future condition of no build and build. But we are continuing to analyze areas where we do see some differences in those build and no build conditions to determine the predicted severity of those crashes. So, and whether based on that analysis, any locations would need safety specific mitigations. So next slide. Just a couple of next steps here related to the safety analysis. So as I just said, we are looking more closely at that intersection segment crash data for 2027 and 2045. So we'll be working with all of your staff to discuss that analysis, identify if and what those potential mitigations would be. And then the results of the analysis and those mitigations would be included in the draft environmental assessment. And we can also plan to share the results of that analysis at a future conversation with you all, perhaps at one of those workshops that we were discussing earlier. So I think that's about it for the safety analysis, and we can take more questions if you have them.
Okay, great. Well, we have a little bit of time left, folks. Is there any other questions for ODOT staff here today? Okay, great. Trent, is there any other business we need to do today?
The next couple of meetings will be a combination of the EA, but also getting ready for this monitoring discussion. And I believe that ODOT's working on bringing a guest speaker in who's managed a monitoring program in a different state. So that you'll get some good opportunity to ask questions from a person who's in the know on that sort of type of project. That's what's, I think, anticipated for the November meeting. I'll get out those doodle polls for those two workshops that we talked about earlier. And then a lingering question that I forgot to close on earlier was, knowing that your December meeting is 2 days before that holiday weekend, do you want to meet that week?
I think that'd be too risky. So anyone disagree with that?
Let's see if we can meet the week ahead of that.
And that might be when the workshop is for the EA. I mean, that could be how we sort of stage that if the EA is on track. Okay, that's what I need.
Okay. All right. Well, Nicole, Mandy, thank you so much. Chris as well for your presentations and answering our questions today. And we'll look forward to speaking to you next time.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
all.
All right. Bye-bye.